So internet, just to prove how much of an idiot I am, I had been thinking I've been recording this video for the last 5 minutes, and it turns out I was talking to a video still. So yeah, gotta start over. So anyways, hi. You know who I am. I'm your favorite Janite. If you've been watching the TikToks, you know that I talk about the 2005 movie a lot as I'm reading through the different chapters. And I've been getting a lot of commentary from people across social media that they really like that I'm talking about 2005, which was interesting to me because when I did a poll on Mastodon sometime back, I asked, let's settle it for once and for all. Is it 1995 or 2005? 1995 won by quite a bit, which is fine. That's your prerogative. It's a fine series. Don't get me wrong. I got hooked on it too when it came out. So, and I used to, like, in my youth, after I'd go out drinking, I'd come home, I would get, like, ginger ale or something to drink or water or whatever and throw in 1995 and just watch it until I fell asleep. So that was kind of like my hangover cure, which I don't know if Jane would appreciate or not, but there you go. So the big problem that people seem to have with the 2005 version is that it does not stand up to the book or the spirit of the book. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I also don't believe that every adaptation of anything is ever going to be 100%. And so the argument that it needs to be is false. It's very disingenuous. And it drives me crazy when people start talking about that. Because we typically do not hear arguments made for other adaptations of Pride and Prejudice that don't fit into this model of whatever 1995 apparently shows. So I thought that's all poppycock, and I decided, well, I'm getting all this commentary about people how like me talking about 2005, so why don't I just create a series of videos comparing the book to the 2005 movie? Pretty smart, right? So I decided that's what I'm going to do. So every Monday, this is going to drop. I'm going to be covering at least 2 chapters, depending upon where we're at in the movie. This is going to be the slowest way I've ever watched this movie in my entire life because I've only watched the first 4 minutes at this point. And I've spent probably about 2 hours doing the script and doing the recording. So yeah, it's gonna take a while. Now also keep in mind too that there is a lot of content that's cut from the book, which understandably is due to time. And also understandably, a lot of stuff is gonna be shifted to make the narrative better. Now, Jane is a fabulous writer, we know this, but she's not God or any godlike creature. So there's some stuff of hers I'm sure that could have been improved upon, despite what everybody else says. So, all right, so let's go into the book. We're going to talk about chapters 1 and 2. So this is where we're at. We meet the Bennets. We're introduced to Mr. and Mrs. Bennet first. They're arguing. She talks about him vexing her nerves. She really wants him to go meet Bingley so that they can get the introduction, so the girls can go meet him. Mr. Bingley is kind of like, not really my thing. I don't think I want to. Mrs. Bennet is like, well, I'm getting all this gossip from Mrs. Long, and so I need her to go and do the introduction. And then she kind of continues to kind of pile it on by saying, oh, well, Lady Lucas and Lord and Sir William Lucas are going to go meet him, and they never meet anyway. So obviously this Bingley character is somebody of importance. And the fact that he's got some cash is even better. So Mr. Bennet is teasing the shit out of her. And it's not going to happen. So we come to chapter 2, we find out that he has seen Bingley, and that he's a fine fellow. Mrs. Bennet is all aflutter because, why is he teasing her so? And then we get that quote, about Mr. Bennet's, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion for my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration for these last 20 years. Also in the book, Mr. Bennet makes it very clear who his favorites are. He thinks that Lydia and Kitty are empty-headed. Jane is Jane. Mary is too serious, and Lizzie is his favorite. And that's where that quote begins with, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? Because Mrs. Bennet wants at least Jane to get married, and Jane's the prettiest of the bunch, so yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so this is what's happening in the first 2 chapters. So let's get to the movie. So the first 2 chapters of the movie are smushed into about 4.5 minutes. And Joe Wright, the director, takes a interesting approach. And so here's what he does. In the book, we're immediately dropped into in media res with the Bennets. In the movie, Wright decides that he's going to create the ambiance and get us to know the Bennets as who they are. We're still going in media res, which means we're being dropped into the middle of it, but not really. We're watching how Lizzie is coming in, and then we're getting introduced to the Bennets slowly. So the opening shot is Lizzie walking on the field. She's reading a book. She closes the book, and the book is First Impressions. If you know your Janite history, you know First Impressions was the original name of Pride and Prejudice. It was written between 1796 and 1797. And I did hear a rumor after the movie came out that the movie itself is supposed to take place in the late 1700s. And that's allegedly why the clothing isn't period correct for the Regency era. Anyway, so First Impressions, the name got changed in 1801 to Pride and Prejudice, because there was another lady author whose book came out in 1801 named First Impressions, so they didn't want any confusion. Jane's dad had tried to get it published between 97 and 01, and obviously it doesn't get published until much later on. But the book is named Pride and Prejudice, and it comes from a phrase in Frances Burney's book, Celia. All right, so there's that. So we watch Lizzie walking. She's got the book, and as she's coming into the estate, we are now learning some things about the family. One, we know they have money because look how large the estate is. It's fairly decent sized. We are learning that they have servants who are doing servanty things, so they have money to keep servants. They have a lot of white clothes, and the reason why this is an indicator of wealth is because back in those days there was no washing machines. So all clothes were washed by hand. So if you had light colored clothes, especially white, it was imperative to you to keep them clean and nice and what have you. And doing so was expensive, incredibly expensive. Wright also uses clothes to tell us about the personality of the sisters. So when we're introduced to Lizzie, she's wearing dark clothes, and her hair is very, swept up, and, she's very neat. So we learn that she's a little bit more serious. Now, we know Lizzie to end up being, she's got a sharp sense of humor. She's funny. She's very loyal. She doesn't take herself too terribly seriously, but we're introduced to her as being somebody who is serious. As we pan in, we see the interior of the house. We see a lot of frippery. There's ribbons, there's clothes, so we know that women's work is being taken care of. We're introduced to Jane, who's wearing light colors to indicate that she is a lighter in spirit. We see Lydia and Kitty are running. They're giggly, so we understand that they're probably a little bit not as serious as Jane. We're introduced to Mary, and Mary's playing the piano. She's also dressed in our dark clothes, and if you hadn't read the book, that the clothing is an indicator that she's also sees herself as being very serious. So the camera continues to pan, and it leads you up to a half-open door where Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are arguing, and this condenses that first 2 chapters essentially in that discussion. The language isn't exact. We do get the quote about my poor nerves, yada, 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 last 20 years, etc. And he also tells her that he has visited Bingley and that he will be at the ball 2 weeks hence. Chapter 3 and 4 go more into this, so I'm curious to see where that picks up. But if I remember the movie, chapters 3 and 4 I don't think exist in the movie, but we'll get there next week. Okay, so anyways, Mrs. Bennet's excited. She kisses Mr. Bennet. He, reaches up and gives her a kiss back, and they're all lovey-dovey. The door swings open. Mrs. Bennet runs out. Mr. Bingley, of his immediate wealth, is going to be at Netherfield, and he's going to come to the ball. All the girls are excited. Elizabeth is like, what the fuck is going on? Jane is her usually demure, cheerful self, and everybody else is just like, all right, cool. And as that scene ends, then the camera takes us outside and we're panning away from Longbourn. So in that 4.5 minutes, we have learned that Bingley is coming, got introduced to the Bennets, told about their current status, which they have money, and the kind of life they lead, which not is one of leisure, even though Mr. Bennet's office has like orchids and all this bullshit in it. But that he has... that he is a man of substance, which is why he loves Lizzie so much. One of the final things I want to discuss is I recently read an essay where the author made the argument that the Bennet marriage was actually arranged and not for love. And I can kind of understand that because in chapter 1, Mr. Bennet makes a comment. Austen writes that Mr. Bennet thinks that Mrs. Bennet has weak understanding, which is to indicate that she's feeble of mind and she's not that bright. And I don't agree with that because she's hustling the hell to get her daughters married. I mean, women's options back in the late 1700s, early 1800s was very slim. So she's hustling. And we also get the comment that Mr. Bennet makes to her that when she is talking about taking the girls to go meet Bingley, he teases her and says, hey, he might fall for you with your youth and beauty and not one of the daughters, so she needs to be careful. And she kind of tut-tuts him and says, no, my youth and beauty are long gone. And in additional research that I had found that it was indeed a love match and that Mr. Bennet was captivated by her youth and beauty. And we also know that just from interference when we meet the Gardners later on, that her family has some sort of money because her father was an attorney, which was a job of prestige back then. All right, anyways, so that's the first 4.5 minutes, chapters 1 and 2. We are done. I'll see you next week for chapters 3 and 4.